Today we are concluding our first unit on pre-modern history. This is going to take us through the Middle Ages all the way to the year 1200, which is where your book starts. Okay, so there's a lot to go through, so I'm going to go through it very quickly. Feel free to pause the video anytime you need just to kind of soak up the information, and let me know if you have any questions if I didn't go into something in enough detail for you. All right, starting off here, feudalism. Feudalism was a localized political system that was based on reciprocal relationships between lords, vassals, and peasants. Okay, reciprocal means everyone gets something out of the relationship, a symbiotic give-and-take relationship. So the lords were people who owned land, the vassals were the knights who protected that land, and the peasants at the bottom of the hierarchy were those who worked the land. Okay, and then kings were, of course, above the lords. Peasants were the lowest class. Peasants kept some of the food and money that they made and had to give the rest to their lords. Okay, so as you see, everyone gets something out of this relationship. People at the top get the food from the peasants that they cultivate, and then peasants get protection and land from the people at the top. There was also a social hierarchy under the king and queen in a lot of medieval Europe called the three estates of the realm. Okay, the first estate at the top was the clergy, which means church workers. You have your priests, monks, nuns, etc. Then your second estate were your nobles, the upper class, the aristocracy, dukes and knights. And then your third estate, of course, were the peasants, the majority of the people in society. And unlike in America, where we have an upper, middle, and lower class, but you can always become more wealthy, you can always work your way up in America. In medieval Europe, peasants really could not work their way up to being lords. Okay, you remained whatever you were born. The medieval Christian church was very, very influential in people's lives, and it became very powerful as well. By the time of the fall of Rome, Christianity had spread across all of southern, western, and eastern Europe. It had become the major religion in the majority of the continent. Then in the 400s, St. Patrick, you may have heard of, he spread the faith to Ireland. And throughout the Middle Ages, Christianity spread throughout Northern Europe to where the entire continent essentially was Christian. And the church played a very vital role in most people's lives. The Norman conquest of England was one watershed event, a very consequential event of the Middle Ages in Europe. This was in 1066. Now, here in America, when we learn about dates, we learn about 1776, we learn about 1492. In England, every school child learns about that date, 1066, one of the most important dates in British history. So this is when the Norman French army, that means the army from Normandy, which is northern France, they invaded England. And this guy, William the Conqueror, he was the Duke of Normandy, and he led the invasion and defeated King Harold and the English. This ushered in a completely new line of kings and queens in England. When William the Conqueror was crowned King William I of England on Christmas Day of 1066. And this radically changed British history, including the English language. Right? The language we speak today would be different had the Normans not conquered England and brought in their language to change it. So this is actually the last time England has been successfully invaded. They have not been invaded as an island for almost 1,000 years. They're very proud of that. Now we get to Charlemagne. All right, Charlemagne and the Carolingian Renaissance. So the early Middle Ages, from the time of Rome for the next 300 years or so, are seen as a time of very unorganized disunity in Western Europe. And the one man who changed that was Charlemagne. He is known as the father of Europe since he unified much of Western Europe under his control, which, as I said, had been kind of divided, rather chaotic since the fall of Rome 300 years prior. Charlemagne was the king of Francia, or the Frankish kingdom, as you see on the map there in the light green, modern-day France. And during his rule, he conquered the Lombard kingdom, as you see, which is northern Italy. He conquered Saxony and Bavaria, which are in modern-day Germany. And he also conquered northern Spain, where he fought off invading Muslims. The Holy Roman Empire began on Christmas Day of the year 800 when Pope Leo III crowned Charlemagne emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. Popes were very powerful at this time. and he was able to officially institute the nation of the Holy Roman Empire. And this nation actually lasted for over 1,000 years. It was a very multi-ethnic collection of kingdoms, and the borders shifted a bit throughout the 1,000-year history of the Holy Roman Empire. But it lasted in Central and Western Europe until 1806, when it was conquered by Napoleon. Charlemagne's headquarters for the Holy Roman Empire was the Palace of Aachen, and this is in modern-day Western Germany. And this is where he held a lot of councils. He would meet with the great minds of the empire. He would talk with them. And it's also where writings were preserved and duplicated. You might say, well, why is it important that writings were copied? Well, because this is before the printing press. Okay, this is before you could just churn out books on a printer. You had to write them all down. And let's say, for example, if a book only had 10 written copies and they're all in the same place and that place burns down, well, that book is gone forever. All right. So preserving and duplicating writings was a very prestigious position, okay, and those people were called scribes. And this is also seen as one kind of temporary beacon of light during what's known as the Dark Ages. One reason it's called the Dark Ages is because there wasn't much education at the time. It was not seen as very valuable. But Charlemagne really saw it as valuable. So he ushered in this time called the Carolingian Renaissance, named after him. And it was a brief period of very energetic cultural and intellectual activity. Okay, you have learning at the forefront of society in Western Europe for the first time since the fall of Rome. He emphasized literacy, art, and music in the Frankish empires, and then eventually in the Holy Roman Empire when he established it. One reform he made during this time was the standardization of handwriting. It used to be where everyone's letters looked a little different. He standardized it, and that has done wonders for modern scholars who look back at those documents to learn about that time. The 5 patriarch cities of the early Christian church. As I said, the church was very influential at this time. There were no denominations yet at this point in the Middle Ages. It was all just one Christian church. And there were 5 men at a time who were the administrators of the church. And these were called the 5 patriarchs. And there were always these 5 cities where a patriarch was. You had the Patriarch of Rome, who called himself the Pope. Okay, we still have that today. More on that in a second. The cities of Jerusalem, Alexandria, Antioch, and Constantinople. So there were 5 patriarchs of the early church, 1 in each city. Now, during the Middle Ages, the Roman patriarch, who I said calls himself the Pope, he claimed himself to be the sovereign patriarch. He said the other 4 need to submit to his authority, and this created a lot of conflict between the Pope and the other 4 patriarchs. And this led to a big split in the church that was known as the Great Schism in 1054. This was the first division within the Christian church. The church split between Roman Catholic in the West, under the leadership of the Pope, the Roman Patriarch, and then the Eastern Orthodox Church in the East, that was under the leadership of the other 4 patriarchs. So before this, there was only one denomination, and for the next 500 years, until the 1500s, there would remain just 2. Then the Protestant Reformation happened. We'll learn about that in a couple of weeks, and today there are thousands of Christian denominations. Okay, another religion that was really coming of age at this time was Islam. All right, Muhammad was the founder of Islam, and in the year 610, it is believed that the angel Gabriel appeared to Muhammad and told him to memorize and preach a new revelation from God that would be used to, quote, restore God's people to once again worshiping the one true God, Allah. So Muhammad is seen by Muslims as Allah's final prophet, and they view people like Abraham, Moses, and even Jesus to be former lesser prophets of Allah. Islam spread during Muhammad's lifetime throughout Arabia, okay, the peninsula that you see in the map there. That's where he was from. And the community of Islam became a nation with Muhammad as its leader. So Muhammad was a very skilled military general. Therefore, he was able to spread the religion by force. Okay, he was able to go into villages, neighborhoods, countries, and with his army, conquer that region and kill those who refused to convert. So some called Islam the religion of the sword for that reason. After Muhammad's death, the community of Islam split. Okay, similar to how the Christian church split with the Great Schism, right after Muhammad's death, the Muslims had a schism of their own, okay, a split of their own. And that's because Muhammad didn't have any sons. So a lot of people were wondering, well, who's going to be the next leader of the community of Islam? So you had some people who believed the next leader should be Abu Bakr, and that was Muhammad's father-in-law, and he was the one who was appointed as caliph or leader. But there were other Muslims who believed that Muhammad's son-in-law, Ali, was the rightful heir and should have been appointed caliph after Muhammad's death. So this caused a split in the religion. Abu Bakr's supporters became known as Sunni Muslims, and Ali's supporters became known as Shia Muslims, and this division still exists today. If you look at that map of the Middle East, the light green is Sunni and the dark green is Shia. Okay, so Sunni Muslims are about 80% of the Islamic world, and Shia Muslims are about 20%, mostly in Iraq, Iran, and Azerbaijan. Abu Bakr continued to spread Islam after Muhammad's death. He wrote down the Quran, which is the holy book of Islam. He wrote Muhammad's message in that book. And he also started a military campaign that spread the Islamic Empire beyond the Arabian Peninsula. If you look on the map there, the area in the brown was the community of Islam upon Muhammad's death. And then in the orange, all right, that's the expansion of the Islamic Empire under Abu Bakr and his immediate successors. And then it continued to spread throughout all of northern Africa, into Persia, and then even into Spain. And Spain was a Muslim nation for about 800 years. A lot of people don't realize that, but it was a Muslim country up until the late 1400s. So by the end of the 700s, Islam had spread to what we know today of as the Islamic world, right? North Africa and the Middle East, in addition to places like Spain, which are no longer Muslim today. Now, Christians obviously did not like this. They were the people who were conquered in most of this area. North Africa was mostly a Christian region because it used to be a part of the Roman Empire. So Christians certainly did not like their former lands, and especially their holy land, right, Jerusalem and Israel, the place where Jesus lived. They didn't like that being taken over by the Muslim world. However, there was no big attempt to take it back from the Muslims by force, and the reason for that was because the Muslims that controlled the region still allowed Christians to visit it, to make pilgrimages to the Holy Land and see the sites where Jesus was crucified and raised from the dead and things like that. So Christians were like, okay, we don't like this, but we're not going to try to take it back because at least we can still visit without being under threat of violence. But this all changed 300 years later with the arrival of the Seljuk Turks. In the 11th century, which is the 1000s, a different group of Muslims called the Seljuk Turks, they took over the Christian Holy Land, and they sacked the holy cities, including Jerusalem, and they stopped allowing Christians to make their pilgrimages there, and they killed all who tried. Okay, all Christians or Jews who tried to make pilgrimages there, they would murder. So Christians said, okay, now something needs to be done. And what they concluded needed to be done was they needed to take back the Holy Land from the Muslims who had taken it from them 300 years prior. So in the year 1095, the Pope at the time, who was Urban II, he responded to this by giving a call to arms for all good Christians to come to the aid of the church, to come to the aid of their people, and take back Jerusalem from the Muslims. So a lot of Europeans wanted to defend Christ and protect his kingdom, so they answered the call. The majority of people who went on this crusade, as it was known, were peasants, but you also had the knights, like the classic uniform you see in the top right picture there. So big question is, was this crusade a holy war or was it a pilgrimage? Well, in Christianity, there really is no such thing as a holy war, a war that's, God commands Christians to fight. For example, a war might be seen as just, but not as holy. So Pope Urban described this crusade primarily as a mass pilgrimage. He said, we're all going to take a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, but if Muslims try to get in our way, then there's going to be military action. All right, so that's the way he sold this crusade to Christians who did not believe in the concept of a holy war. So the first crusade, this was the years 1096 through 1099. It was incredibly successful for the Crusaders, a huge success, like shockingly so. So much so that pretty much everyone in Europe concluded God must have been on our side. He must have ordained for us to win and get the Holy Land back for his church. So it was a huge success for the Crusaders. They recaptured Antioch and Jerusalem. They removed the Muslims from power there, after which they made both cities into Christian kingdoms. And as I said, most Europeans interpreted this military success as a miracle, as something that was ordained by God. Now, Christians maintained control of these holy cities for 50 years and kept all potential Muslim invaders out. But about 50 years after the First Crusade in the 1140s, a small portion of the Christian kingdoms that had been established during the First Crusade fell to the Muslims again. So this caused Pope Eugene III, who was Pope, the new Pope now, it caused him to call for a second crusade. He said, oh, all right, some of our land from the First Crusade has been taken back, so we need to have a second crusade to reclaim that land. This was a miserable failure for the Crusaders. The Muslims were much better prepared this time, and the Crusaders were decisively defeated and pushed back by the Seljuk Turks. This left the Christian kingdoms, which still existed at this time, it left them weaker and eventually led to the fall of Jerusalem 40 years later at the hand of Saladin. Okay, so Saladin of the Ayyubid Empire was a very skilled Muslim general. He and his Saracens, which are Muslim soldiers, in the year 1187, he and his Saracens recaptured the Holy Land from the Christian Crusaders. First, they captured Damascus, then Jerusalem. Okay, this included the Battle of Hattin and the defense of Jerusalem. One fantastic, well, I wouldn't say the movie itself is all that great, but it has several great scenes. A fantastic depiction of what the Crusades were like. It's called Kingdom of Heaven. And I encourage you to just look up maybe a scene, a battle scene from that, just to get kind of a sense of what the Crusades looked like. Okay, so after controlling the Holy Land for 90 years, Christians were once again pushed out of it, and it was controlled by the Muslims. You might say, why were the Muslims so intent on capturing the Christian Holy Land? Well, Jerusalem was a holy city for Muslims as well, and that's because they believed that Muhammad ascended into heaven at Jerusalem. Okay, so Jerusalem itself is a city that is holy to Christians, Muslims, and also to Jews. Okay, so that's why it's the most hotly contested piece of real estate in the entire world. Pope Gregory the 13th, he then called for a third crusade to recapture Jerusalem. Right, and this one was the biggest one. There were 3 kings who answered the call, all of whom were very skilled generals. You have King Philip II of France, King Frederick Barbarossa of the Holy Roman Empire, and most famously King Richard the Lionheart of England. And the Crusaders were not able to recapture Jerusalem. They did recapture some of the Holy Land, so it was not a complete failure, but they were not able to recapture Jerusalem, which was the whole point. Okay, so while the Third Crusade was ultimately not successful for the Crusaders, it wasn't a total loss, okay, because Richard the Lionheart was able to make a treaty with Saladin. And they signed a treaty that allowed the Muslims to maintain control of Jerusalem as long as they allowed unarmed Christians to make pilgrimages there again. All right, so mission accomplished. All right, that was the whole point of the Crusades, was to open up the Holy Land for Christian pilgrimages without them being victims of violence. All right, so mission accomplished. But the Crusades continued going after that. Okay, this is when it kind of got crazy, okay, very over the top. There were actually several more Crusades after this. There were a total of 9 Crusades, but they just kind of got worse and worse as they went. The Fourth Crusade, which is the last one we're going to go over today, was the craziest one. You have Pope Innocent II. third, he called this crusade in order to recapture Jerusalem. There's a couple years after Richard the Lionheart failed to do so. He said, we got to try one more time. And this time they were going to go by boat. And the people who made ships were the Venetians, people of Venice. So the Venetians made the ships for this expedition. However, they would only give the Crusaders these ships if the Crusaders promised to first attack the city of Zara. That was Venice's rival city, but it was a Christian city in Europe. The Crusaders were like, well, how else are we going to get to the Holy Land? Sure, why not? So the Crusaders did this. They killed off many people in the city of Zara, destroyed the city, and the Pope was like, hold up, this is not what you're supposed to be doing. All right, so this led to the Pope said, okay, he called off the crusade. He excommunicated both the Crusaders and the Venetians, which means to kick them out of the church because of what they did, and called off the Crusades. So this left those Crusaders with no money, no crusade, stuck in the city of Zara with no way to get home, and literally nothing to lose, which is really dangerous. So this led to the Byzantine prince, the Byzantine Empire prince, Alexios Angelos. He said, hey, I'll fund your crusade, but first you got to do something for me. You have to attack the city of Constantinople and make me king. And the Crusaders were like, well, we came this far, why not? So they did this, but Angelos was very quickly dethroned before he could make good on his promise, which left the Crusaders broke once again. All right, so they freaked out at this point, violently pillaged Constantinople, killing and raping thousands of people. And this ended the Fourth Crusade with thousands of Christians dead, not having set a foot in the Holy Land. Okay, this was an absolute flop that did so much harm. And remember, one of the goals of the Crusades was to kind of reunite the church that had been split ever since the schism of 1054. Instead, this further divided the Christian church because you have Catholics and Orthodox killing each other. So after this, there were several more crusades, but none were as large or as significant as the first four, and they kind of died out by the end of the 1200s. The Kievan Rus was a loose federation of Eastern European states in what is now the European portion of Russia, as you see on the map right there. This portion became, this nation of Kievan Rus, it became Eastern Orthodox Christians, which most Russians still are to this day. Now, the Mongols took over the Kievan Rus in 1240 and made it a part of their empire. Moscow became very prominent, a very safe city since they were surrounded by the Mongols, and the Mongols became the leading power in Asia and really in Europe as well, who we'll talk about in a couple weeks. The Vikings, you probably know about Vikings. They were Norse seafarers. They were from Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, and they made their living by raiding ships and villages. They were basically pirates, scoundrels, thieves, nothing good about them. Now, Scandinavia was and is very, very cold, and permafrost made it difficult to farm, so they said, hey, instead of moving south and making an honest living, let's just steal from people. So they pillaged for survival and killed and stole from other people. They also traveled quite a bit. They traveled by ship to Scotland, Iceland, Greenland, and also to Canada. So Christopher Columbus was actually not the first European to set foot on North American soil. In fact, the first European to do so was Leif Erikson. He was a Viking. He was a Norse explorer from Iceland. And in his voyages, he sailed to Greenland and then to the northeastern tip of modern-day Canada, modern-day Newfoundland. And so he became the first European to set foot in North America. He then went back to Greenland, died in 1020, and no Europeans followed his lead. It wasn't until Columbus, over 400 years later, that people actually started going over there regularly and making permanent settlements in the Americas. All right, so I know it's a lot of information. Let me know if you have any questions about the Middle Ages, but that concludes our unit on pre-modern world history.